very rarely is there a perfect decision because you
Yeah.
will always be missing some piece of critical information that, had you known in hindsight, may have led you down another path. But I do think inaction is action in itself. And so your job as the CEO or as an executive or as a contributor to this business is to make the best decision you can with the information you have at hand to move the business forward.
Welcome to Women Who Make It, real conversations with women in the food and beverage industry who are building careers, leading teams, and figuring it all out. After years of building females in food, I've had conversations with some of the most brilliant women in the industry, and they shared the real stuff. The pivots, the boundaries, the burnouts, and the moments of, is this even working, before it finally clicked. So I hit record, and now you get to hear it too. We're Women Who Make It, so let's dig in.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Women Who Make It, the podcast from Females in Food, where we go behind the scenes with women shaping the future of the food and beverage industry. I'm your host, Angela Dodd, and my guest today is Danyel O'Connor, a powerhouse leader whose career spans more than 2 decades across the CPG industry. She's built a rare blend of experience as both an operator and investor, helping brands grow from the inside out. Danyel has represented and advised brands like Cravings by Chrissy Teigen and Mini Melts USA. And today, she's the CEO of Umami, a SaaS platform helping food and beverage companies turn consumer clarity into crave-worthy growth. Danyel, welcome to Women Who Make It. I am so excited to have you here. And as we start the show, tell our listeners what you have made.
What an introduction. I'm humbled by that. And I hope that I can bring content or conversation to today's dialogue that delivers on that. Gosh, what I've made, that's a hard question to answer because I feel like everything that I've been a part of or made has been a team effort. I'm really most proud of bringing amazing products to market that meet unique consumer needs and building strategy and insights with businesses that afford resource allocation for long term success. But if I think about some of the things I'm most proud of, one of those things is a little bit more personal, and that's kind of allowing my professional path to unfold in ways that I never really imagined it could. And the reason why that is something I'm proud of is because anyone who knows me knows I'm a little bit type A and a planner. And so, kind of giving in to the rhythm instead of kind of forcing things is a task that requires a little bit of attention from me.
I can completely relate to that. And, actually just want to kind of like jump into some of that leadership journey that you've experienced. Take us back for a minute. You've had various roles from the beginning, right? And knowing that you're so great at building teams, but you've also advanced your career very quickly. And that is hard to do, right? How did you really own that fast track in your career when your roles and opportunities were moving so fast? And how did you frame that story so that everybody around you, your team, your peers, and stakeholders really felt confident from day one?
Great question. So, I'm an open book. So, I believe in clarity and transparency. And so, when entering a new role, I think the most important thing for me is to share openly, what I know, where I need to grow, what information I need to learn to be effective in that new role, what excites me about it, what keeps me up at night or scares me, and then future vision around that role in the team and how I see them contributing. And I think lastly, I would say I say what I'm going to do and then I deliver. And I think that's incredibly important. And we can kind of talk about that a little bit later as well. But when you're working with new teams, building trust is so important. And so that clarity and accountability is critical.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, and that rolls right into stacking credibility early of how do you drive confidence, and having that integrity and saying what you're going to do with new teams is so important. I'm curious, in this time spectrum, or even if there's an example you want to share around getting those early wins or visible projects up front, do you have advice for some of our listeners who might be also moving very fast in their careers, and how you went to, not just say what you were going to do with your teams, but making sure that you were getting those early wins, and then also gaining that visibility, right? You got to show
Yeah.
progress and projects and managing perception along the way. Would love for you to share an example around that if one comes to mind.
Sure. I think all projects tend to be extremely unique, but I think the approach can be relatively simple. And I do have a tendency to oversimplify. So
Mm.
apologies if I tend to do that during this conversation as well. I think my approach is really twofold. It's be curious. I think understanding the stakeholders in any project or new
Mhm.
role is super important and their objectives. And then
Sure.
marrying that a little bit with the big picture focus of the business. And then level setting, like understanding what is my role in those changes or
Mm.
those objectives, and how do I excel at my role. And then I think knowing, as part of that level set, knowing myself and what my triggers are. So I mentioned a little bit, I can oversimplify, but I can also kind of have a pace problem. Like I like to move really fast. And so if
Mm.
I'm working with an organization that wants to be a little bit slower and more meticulous, I have to slow my pace to match that of the organization
Mm.
so I don't create friction where it's unnecessary. And so those would be, my kind of two rules of thumb. Be curious,
Mm.
understand the situation and the stakeholders, and then level set, understand my role and, what my triggers are.
Yeah, it's such good advice, especially when we think about there are hard decisions that, as you rise quickly in your career and being forced to make some of those hard decisions and bringing the team along in that. I know is something early in my career. I received some of that feedback, right? You want to make impact, you want to, if you see the path forward, but it's so important to also assess the climate and the culture of the company and making sure you're not moving without your team. I'm curious when you're under pressure and
Yeah.
kind of making decisions in times of uncertainty or some of those hard decisions. You mentioned those two key points. I'm wondering if there's other framework that you use when deciding under uncertainty and when the information isn't imperfect. As you
Yeah.
rise into a CEO position, right, you don't always have all the information. And sometimes it's just like leaning in and using your best sound judgment. But as a leader, right, you have to take action.
Yeah.
Curious, what framework you've applied through those times of
Yeah,
uncertainty.
this is such a great question. And it's fun because I've worked with a lot of people that have been top three consulting agency employees or other CEOs or kind of academia. And I think what you can run into in conversation is people that want to take a very academic approach or understand what perfect looks like, but don't understand the steps between where you are today and how to get to perfect. And it is really the messy middle, and you have to be uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. I always tell my kids, like, you've grown up when you get extremely comfortable being uncomfortable because that's what it means. I do have a series of kind of questions or thoughts that I run through myself that help me. And I'm sure a lot of people have frameworks that they use that are equally functional for them. But, number one is this a problem big enough that it needs to be more than me in the quote unquote war room making
Mhm.
decisions and discussing it? Like, who needs to be in that room with me? And then what's important to the business short term and long term? And can I make decisions that are going to benefit both of those things, or is one more important than the other? What information is available to me today, or what's easily attainable? What information is missing, and what, impact does that have on my decision making? What is the risk or reward of the decision to the business, and is it reversible? Do the decisions impact anything downstream that isn't obvious to me? This is a great moment to phone a friend,
Yeah.
especially if you have some kind of decisions or tentative decisions in mind. And then opportunity cost, when you make one decision, it often is at the expense of another decision. And sometimes decisions don't have to be an A or B situation. Can it be A and B? Can I dual path, a couple of options that are going to benefit the business both. And I think then, the last for me is kind of just understanding when and where are my levers for go, no go on decision making. And I think that's relatively broad, but even in most like really critical decisions that require fast acting, it only takes a few moments to run through those questions
Yeah.
on paper or in your head. And so I do think it helps you make sure you're not missing anything.
I love that. And I think referencing back to that framework, right, as well to
Yeah.
make sure you aren't missing anything. I think all too often you can get into an impulse in decision making, right, and have some blind spots without considering all the different angles. And I love that framework that you've built around that to really making sure you're making those solid choices in times of uncertainty. I heard a quote the other week and it stuck with me. It's very from, an entrepreneurial journey of, there is, as you mentioned, you just get comfortable being uncomfortable, but like
Yeah.
you have to make, even for me, when you're used to being a part of businesses or teams, and then you're the one having to make that decision, whether it's for your own business or for your team, it's very uncomfortable. Like, and,
Yeah.
just having that confidence in yourself is so
There is
important.
Yeah, very rarely is there a perfect decision because you
Yeah.
will always be missing some piece of critical information that, had you known in hindsight, may have led you down another path. And so I think you have another question that we'll kind of discuss a little bit later, but I do think inaction is action in itself. And so, you need your job as the CEO or as an executive or as a contributor to this business is to make the best decision you can with the information you have at hand to move the business forward.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I love that. And to your point, yeah, there is no perfect decision. You make the best that you can in that moment with the information that you have and then stick with it, right? And do what you say you're going to do. And I think that really is the differentiator in some good leadership models. Now, I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a while now,
Yeah.
and you've had some really cool chapters and roles that we didn't necessarily go into detail about in your
Yeah.
bio. And I'm curious if you can tell our listeners which role or chapter, most accelerated your growth, but also, how did it change your leadership? And then I'd love, to put that as one question, but then also what was the most fun role? Like where were you having the most fun or kind of
Sure.
unique experience as well? I think your career journey, I've always just been so inspired and a fan of it over the years. So I'm excited for our listeners to learn more.
Yeah, I guess it's not the most traditional path in CPG. So the funny thing is I never would have expected to be in the food industry. I went to school for advertising and marketing and was going to work for an agency and ended up taking a job in charge of importing cheese from Europe and marketing it in the US out of college because I like the idea of owning the process instead of, a cookie cutter piece of a process. And so that's what kind of started me on my food journey. And, maybe 3 years in, somebody said, "Oh, once you're in the food industry, you never get out." And I was like, well, shit, somebody should have said that in the interview. But also, gosh, the people in the food industry are amazing. When I started in that space, I was one of very, very few females in the room, and it was always assumed that I was like the CEO's daughter and not
Mhm.
somebody that, was qualified to be in the room. So that was an interesting journey or time to come into the food industry. I've had a consulting business that worked with a number of different brands and producers, bringing amazing products to market and figuring out commercial fit and positioning. That was a ton of fun. I have had the pleasure of working with John Legend and Chrissy Teigen, supporting Cravings, which was a blast. They're such wonderful people with big hearts and beautiful products. And, I think probably if I had to pinpoint the moment in my career that I experienced the most growth would be in working with Good Foods Group. So they were a customer of mine in my consulting business. And so I had worked with them for, roughly 8 or 9 years before going internal in that business and being asked to join as an executive teammate. So it was super interesting to go from kind of an outside contractor with friendly relationships into the role of an executive leader inside the business. And then, it was my first kind of full executive team. It was my first reporting to a board. And I just had an amazing mentor and collaboration partner in the CEO and founder, Kurt Penn, because we had, just gelled and worked together so long that it felt like a natural progression to my career with Good Foods. And so I
Yeah.
think I learned the most in that role.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun in that career journey.
Yeah.
That was something I learned about you most recently is that you're originally a gal in the dairy industry,
Yeah.
which I love about you. Within FIF, we have our dairy division, and I've got to know so many incredible women specifically in working in dairy, and I just love that your career path started there. But you bring up a really good point around, moving from a consultant into an executive role is a challenging stretch for anybody. And especially if it's in an established business. And I know you brought up a point around being one of the only or the few women in the room, but also ascending into leadership roles at a younger age in your career. As you assimilate into teams, I'm curious if you've developed a ritual in the first 60 days of building trust when, as you said, it could be some much more tenured teams or individuals that you're trying to
Yeah.
build trust. Let's say with a 60-year-old man, right? Or a team that have been around a long time. How have you done that? And how have you managed kind of your own confidence through that process as well? I'm
Yeah,
sure
I
they've been
think
extremely warm and welcoming teams, but it's still uncomfortable,
yeah.
right?
Yes, I mean, some have been great. And of course, like everybody else in their career, I've had those moments that were less than great. I want to say that, like, I don't consider myself at a destination. I consider myself on a journey. And so I'm still learning, and I'm sure I'm going to share things that work for me today. And, you know, 2 months from now, I might have something I would have said differently, or 2 years from now. And so I also welcome whoever's listening if they want to share their thoughts or things that work for them to kind of also do so. But as far as like when I kick off with the team, I talked about being an open book. I mean, that's really who I am. And so I bring that authenticity. First off, you need to be there in person. I know this is a remote first place. And I know sometimes we're joining remote teams and we don't have that luxury. But if there's any way possible, at least with your core team, when you join a business, get with that core team in person right away. There's just things about relationships you can't build remotely. And then I like to kick off with a kind of an ask anything session, which just reinforces open communication and transparency. So, like any question they want to ask me, I will answer to the best of my ability. And then I like to kind of go into two icebreakers for different reasons. And they're kind of like funny, common icebreakers. One is two truths and a lie.
Mhm. Love that
And
one.
yeah, I love it because I think you just really get to know people and they often share something you might not know unless you had been friends with them for 6 months. So you get something like really insightful early by doing that. And then I like a would you rather, so kind of like a would
Mm.
you rather eat a ghost pepper or get sprayed by a skunk? Something kind of ridiculous, but it's really interesting to see how people's minds work and the logic they put behind those decisions. And it often gets a little bit of laughter going. And then, sharing kind of my leadership style, just so people know what to expect from me, sharing that I have an open door policy. If they reach out via text, they can, get a response from me quickly if they feel like there's an urgent matter. I like to lean into curiosity. I always have to remind myself, I think as women and as business people, we can tell ourselves a lot of stories and just not walk into a situation or a room with judgment or tell myself a story about it, but like really lean in with questions and curiosity. And then I like to build kind of a playbook for executing any necessary change. And so I think to myself, and sometimes you have this in your mind or a hypothesis in your mind walking in the door, but you're testing that hypothesis. So where do you want to go? How many steps away are you from your goal? What amount of time will it take you to get there? Who needs to join you on the journey? Who or what could prohibit, progress on that journey? And then kind of mapping out like what those steps are and maybe pitfalls and opportunities in each of those steps. And that's, I
Yeah.
would say, roughly kind of how I approach new things.
I love that. I think early on, any new leader assimilating onto a team, right? I think that vision is what you just described, right? Like how in having a vision early on that the team can actually follow and having confidence in that vision and the steps against it that you're going to take, I think can bring everybody on board very quickly in that manner. I love that. And those icebreakers. I think I'm always looking for a good icebreaker. So
Yeah.
um jotting that one down, I started a call the other day and I used the one from the FIF summit of like,
Yeah.
tell me what's the screensaver on your phone right now. It's a good one to get to know somebody on what's important to them and what they have as a screensaver or a kid or a dog or a sunset.
I like that
We
one.
all have different role outside of just what's our job title and how long have we been at the company, right?
That's
Getting to that next personal level. So pivoting a little bit, and this is something we talk a lot about in the community, and I think it's a space that is unknown in a way because not many people go from, let's say, being an operator to an investor. I'm curious, moving into this investment side of the industry really sharpen your judgment? And what do you wish you would have known earlier? It's
Mm.
a rare perspective, I think, to be able to see both sides of that coin.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I love businesses and I love people and like the way they make decisions and the way businesses grow and thrive. They're like living organisms. And so I think the thing I like most about, sitting as a senior advisor at Altamont Capital is like the amount of businesses or books that we get to review and just kind of all shapes, sizes, leadership styles, opportunity levels. And so I think like just sharpening my teeth by having that exposure is really fun. And then I think there's maybe two things that I feel like sitting with ACP has reinforced for me. One is that like strong CEOs and leadership teams are necessary for success. And then the second would be that we talked about it a little bit earlier, like inaction is action in itself. So I've had just the pleasure of learning from like a lot of really great examples of amazing leaders. And then, learning from some mistakes or issues that have cropped up in businesses. And, most of all, learning from the ACP team, which is like wildly intelligent. And so I just like, soak up everything they are through osmosis in the room with them.
And very smart people to be able to be around. Once you're sitting on that side and interacting with so many different leadership teams and founders and looking at their books and asking the questions, I have to imagine it's been a very enriching experience to be able to be in that room, but also how much value you've also contributed through those conversations. And it actually brings up another point around just being in the boardroom and that influence in the boardroom. I know you sit on the board of Mini Melts. And, in one of our earlier discussions, we've talked about building confidence in the boardroom for specifically women and kind of what that means to you. I think it kind of ties into some of the conversations you have in that investor lens as well. But how do you contribute when potentially you're one of the few or only women in the room and
Mhm.
contribute with conviction, create alignment, and avoid over talking in those situations as you've taken on your first board positions?
Yeah, isn't over talking as a woman, it just feels like such a like cliche, oh, over talking, oversharing. I would lean into kind of preparation is kind of my key. So I can be extremely voracious. Like I like diving into business challenges and I like asking a lot of questions. And so I do have to remind myself preparing for a board meeting, like what is the overlying objective or theme of that board meeting? Because they often have one being prepared, like read all the materials beforehand, you're given materials, and then I highlight for me what are the areas that I think I can add the most value or have most interest in so that I don't chime in on everything because it's, my nature to be interested or ask questions. And then I'll also remind myself, what level the conversation needs to remain at. Like some topics are for follow up with the leadership team post board meeting, they're not for deep diving during a board meeting. And then it's like check your ego at the door, lean into kind of Socratic methods, not judgment, and just read the room. I think you can gauge if you are talking too much, sharing too much, off point, somehow in an area people don't want to play with or is better left kept for an aside with the executive team. And so you just have to read the room and
Mhm.
learn to understand those cues.
And I should have clarified earlier, like, I think the women over talk, I think that's something we tell ourselves too much too. I
Yeah.
do want to clarify that point. In reality, I don't think we speak up enough, right?
Yeah.
And
I mean, I've gotten that I've gotten the overtalk feedback before, but I also think in general, there are several types of leadership styles and I'll never be the, old wise sage, maybe someday, but I'll probably never be the old wise sage sitting in a corner, nodding and waiting and chewing on everybody's words and saying, one smart thing at the end of it because I'm so curious. It's who I am. And I think, as women, we're told kind of not to show up as who we are in the workplace or that some of those things are too much. And I would say, you have to show up who you are because who you are is what makes you special and your perspective and your approach is unique and beneficial in exciting ways. It just may not be traditional. I think the one piece of advice is figure out what your strengths are, figure out what your weaknesses are, and lean into the strengths that are most applicable in your business life. Because I think for a period of time, we were told, be everything you are in the workplace. And I kind of disagree with that. I am everything I am at home with my family, but sometimes I'm the skills that make me a better mom or a better spouse. And sometimes I'm the skills at work that make me a better work associate. And I don't think there's anything wrong with leaning into the skills that most apply to those situations.
Yeah, I think that's wise advice. Whether it's a pendulum, right?
Yeah.
Of I think at one time it was like, don't be yourself at all and fit into this other box, and then
Yeah.
be totally yourself. And I think there's this fine middle of like, let's apply what works to the job situation. But I know me personally, I have overanalyzed, overthought about way too many situations, probably just as recent as this morning, as
Yeah.
to playing something over in my head and things that other people just don't spend another second on. And I thought, did that come across right? Or how did that sound? Did I present that right? And did I ask the right questions? And I do think as women, we're way too harder on ourselves and over analyzing a situation afterwards. And
Yeah. And
given,
just overthinking, how could I
oh,
do it different instead of maybe that situation, somebody else didn't respond effectively. I have one that I play back in my head, and it happened years and years and years ago. And I was in an executive leadership role, and I was at an event, and somebody came up and said, "Oh, it looks like, the person in charge isn't here. I'll come back later. There's no decision makers here." And the gentleman next to me that worked for me was like, "She's standing right next to me." And I had come back and I was sharing it with a teammate, and he was an older gentleman, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, Danielle, what do you expect with a blonde ponytail?" And I thought, for the longest time, can I not wear a ponytail? Should I be cutting my hair so people take me more seriously? Like, do I not come across with enough executive presence? And it's so crazy that you replay that in your head instead of, why is the perception that I can't be taken seriously because of a ponytail? And to some degree, it's like I'm not judging, a man's flowing locks or premature balding as whether or not he, contextually has the ability to lead something.
yes. I couldn't agree more. And it's funny you bring up the ponytail thing because my
Yeah.
first client meeting that I went to at like 24 years old in my very first job, and I was given direction that I should have my hair pulled back into a ponytail to make me look older. Um, and so I'm like, can we just do away with,
The hair advice.
hair
Yeah,
advice altogether, please? Like, not relevant. Let's move on.
that's right.
um, oh my gosh. Yeah, I could reflect on that for another hot minute.
Yeah,
Well, I know as as we come on, I know there's so many more things we could chat about. I want our listeners to know though, you're in a new role.
yeah.
As we mentioned, you're now the CEO of Umami's. Tell us a little bit about Umami, number one. Like, I feel like I have something to learn here. What are you guys offering? And what are some of your non negotiables for the first 90 days as you come into this role?
Sure. So Umami is amazing. And I know you asked me earlier, like, what am I having fun doing? And I think I've been so fortunate to find something fun and exciting about every role I've had. And I do enjoy working. That's why I work as hard as I do. But Umami is my first experience with a SaaS and AI enabled platform. And I am usually in the physical, tasty product space.
Yeah.
So it is new for me, but I fell in love with the concept. It came out of Fieldbook Studio One, which was run by Alloy Partners, this venture studio group that I now have the pleasure of working with. And the concept was really around like consumer listening and applying that to the product development process in a unique way. And I was fortunate to come in its inception and kind of help reshape how it hyper focuses on the inflection point of ideation. So, like, if you are in a business or you've been in product development for any period of time, you get IRI sales data, you get kind of Mintel trend reporting, you get wild ideas from retail buyers or great ideas from retail buyers. And then you have to somehow kind of braid this into an insight that applies to your capabilities and maybe answers a demand in the marketplace in a way that's exciting. And then you spend a ton of money and time developing it and launching it, and hopefully it succeeds. But we all know like
The majority
90
don't.
plus percent don't. And so what Umami does is it listens to reviews. So it's not
Mm.
social, like social platform listening in the way that, is performative or maybe like pop and circumstance trending, but it's like what product attribution feedback are you getting in the marketplace? And
Wow.
so you can, as a brand, do a brand health check and say, okay, here's who I think I am and what people love about me. And Umami says, actually, here's what people love about you, and here's the persona of that person, and here's what people don't like about your products, and here's the persona you're losing with. And
Mm.
then you can
So
put in
cool.
your advantages. So any of that reporting you have, and then you can put in your capabilities or your current ingredients if you want near an innovation. And then you can go in and you can innovate. So you can say, I want to innovate a product in X category with these advantages. And it'll come back and it'll say, if you develop this product with these product attributes in this size at this price, it will serve the need of these people. This is the market value of that need. And here are the retailers that are most likely to sell it. And so you get a stage gate report and you get kind of the start of a commercial plan that you can pass on to your sales and marketing group. And then you can go into your, qualitative, formulation process. And the cool thing is all of these ideas that
Okay.
you run through Umami become part of your archive and you can tag them by retailer, by category, by attribute, by revenue potential, by near in, mid, or long lead innovation. And so now you can refresh those ideas anytime you want and see if they're still relevant. So it's like this really cool
Wow.
way of just ensuring a little bit more certainty that you're meeting a need in the marketplace when you develop products. So
Before you put
I,
all the
I geek
money
out.
behind it. Well, that is
Yeah.
huge. That's a game changer for our industry, right? Like
Yeah.
how much money goes into launching products and to have this type of technology give us a more robust data point as to whether it's going to succeed or fail or how consumers are going to perceive it in any given category is truly a game changer. I love that.
Yeah.
Given from somebody who has commercialized products in the very traditional way of the last 25 years in this industry, in the hands of startups all the way
Yeah.
down to major CPG brands, like, I can see where
Yeah,
that's gonna have an
it doesn't
impact.
matter size, it's really about that
Yeah,
innovation culture, right? And if you
yeah,
wanna lean into that in an exciting way, and I think everybody's looking for ways to use AI, but is still just trying to figure it out, and I think the great thing about AI with the right partner is you've got somebody that's testing the logic and validating the output, and so you
mhm,
understand that what you're getting is good information, and I think that's the risk right now with AI because it's so young.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, and Umami can offer that. I love it. And so you guys are the best people to ask, from an F&B outlook, what are the most important consumer behaviors as we look into the next 12 or 24 months? Protein's been hot. I
Yeah.
hear fibers coming right in behind it. What are you what are you seeing?
Yeah. So I am both like an innovation driver and a little bit of a traditionalist. So I would tell you, like, from my perspective as a business leader, like the two biggest drivers for sales in the food space are always value proposition, which is what is the product worth to the customer? And it doesn't have to be low price. It can be based on product attributes or what's important to them psychographically. And then the second part is flavor and experience because you need that repeat purchase. And if they don't love it, you're not going to get that repeat purchase. And so I think we're going to see a lot more focus on kind of texture and sensory
Mm,
experience with products, especially when you think about all of the influencer engagement that happens when opening, trying products. I think
mm,
experiencing the product in different ways will be important. And then diverse ingredients that leverage functionality. I think you're right. Digestive health, brain and gut connection,
mhm,
fiber, protein sources with additional nutrient benefits, not just straight protein. And then I think food as mood therapy. So, like, kind of
mm,
thinking about cravings
big one.
differently with the GLP-1 stuff happening. Like, what is mood therapy for food instead of, this kind of GLP-1 craving, situation that we're going through. And then I have this goal. So I get to work with Fieldbook Studio 2, which is being stood up by Alloy, the group that helped develop indirectly Umami. And like, I just have this passion for the idea of taking unique ingredients that are ecologically sound and provide benefit to consumers and
Mm,
building products that fit conventional product needs with those. And so, like, I'm super excited I get to help start to tackle that challenge next year with the Fieldbook Studio too.
I love that. Well, we'll be staying tuned for all the updates as we head into 2026 on all the work that you guys are doing and the products coming to the market. So very, very exciting. I learned something new, and I know our listeners did too, as to like what the future of F&B looks like. And it sounds like Umami is where it's at. So really, really excited for that. As we come to a close in our conversation, though, I'm wondering if we can revisit this whole idea of the playbook for
Yeah.
rising fast. And specifically, so many of our listeners are ambitious individuals that are looking to advance into senior leadership within the F&B industry. And I'm wondering if you can share one action an ambitious manager can take in the next 30 days to accelerate towards senior leadership. And then also, like, what's one thing that they should stop doing as well?
Oh shit. Okay. Um gosh, I think I don't have one action. I think I have a frame of mind that I think is important to maintain. And so, I think it's that curious growth mindset is so, so important. Do what you say you're going to do. So meet or exceed expectations. And you do that by understanding the stakeholders and what is important to them. And then I think take opportunities that scare you. I mean, I'm working in a SaaS platform right now, guys. Come on. So take opportunities that scare you. I think as women, we want to be 110% prepared for everything. 85% might be good enough. Trust your intentions and your ability to learn and excel. And don't be performative. That's my don't do. Don't be performative. Be the best version of yourself to help your workplace thrive and read the room.
I love that. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Danielle. This has been a powerful but also practical conversation, and that's one of the things I truly love the most about you is you do, as you said in the very beginning, like you have this innate ability of simplifying some topics that a lot of people like to overcomplicate, frankly.
Yeah.
And it's one of the traits that I love the most. And I know our listeners have most certainly got a lot out of this discussion and your advice and what they can implement today. So thank you. So before we close out, tell everybody, where can they find you? Where can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah. So first, I just want to say thank you, Angela, for everything you do with the Female in Food Network and building this community. I think it's so important to have people you can talk to and work with and support you through your career journey. So thank you for building this. And, one way to connect with me is through Females in Food.
Yeah.
Another way would be through LinkedIn, Danyel O'Connor. I'm the only one with Danyel. It's a weird spelling. And then also, visit us at madebyumami.com and you can, send a note there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And to everyone listening, thank you for tuning in to Women Who Make It. If today's episode inspired you, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and also join our community. As Danielle said, femalesinfood.community. You can learn more and be sure to connect with us on LinkedIn and Instagram for more stories, learning, and leadership resources. Because at the end of the day, we're not just making food, we're making moves. We're women who make it. See you next time.